I am so excited for today's guest. It's a very sort of special encounter for me, if I'm being honest. This author is somebody as a teenager, I picked up a book and it was the first fantasy book I'd ever read. And I loved the series. And I've actually met her as well in person. And she was just so kind and so giving and kind of the start of my own writing journey. So it's a little bit weird being here 12 years later and being able to pick her brain and ask her all these questions and just say thank you for starting this journey for me and listening to what your journey's been like. So I would like to welcome Isobelle Carmody. How are you?
I'm absolutely great. What a beautiful introduction. I mean, it tells me really how old I am, because my PhD was actually marked by someone who basically said what you just said when she was introducing me to her students recently in a talk. And I thought, it's actually so nice to have been around long enough to be mulched back into the system again and to be talking to people who say this thing, which I always find so amazing, that when they, for some reason, reading my books, they decided to start their own writing journey. And I always find that, why is that? You know, isn't that an interesting thing that people, because I have books that did that for me too, but not every book makes you feel like that. And what is it about some books? I think, you know, what they do is they resonate to the questions that you will strive to answer as a writer. I think that's what it is. I think it's more like an echo that you find in one of those writers than that I should be a genius who, you know, passes it on like a baton.
But I would 100% agree with that, because I remember being a teenager and reading your books and so bits and pieces. I was like, she can't do that to the characters. Why would she do this? But I feel like now as a writer myself, I do those things. Like, I'm just like, I would feel terrible reading this in a book, but writing it, that's fine. But there was such realism in your books. And I think sort of coming into that, you had the full-blown fantasy aspect, but it was so relatable in so many ways because it was based on a teenage girl. And I was a teenage girl, you know, and it was just amazing. It was so relatable. And then even meeting you, I remember meeting you for the first time at Supernova. I think I was 19 at the time, and I think I'd only published my first book. And at that time, it was a big accomplishment, but I want to say maybe more of a hobby for me at the time. I was like, yes, I got my goal. This is great. And then I remember meeting you and I was so nervous and you were so lovely and you were just like, keep going, like you've done a really great job. And I think that made all the difference as well, because I started writing when I was 15, and then when I started doing research on you, you started when you were 14, and I was thinking, it's so crazy to think that, you know, obviously we're different times, different ages, different lifestyles, but we were both around the same time when we started writing and expressing ourselves.
Different age.
It is. Why did you start? What was it for you that made you want to start? Because you started the Obernwtyn series when you were 14. What gave you the inspiration and the push to write?
I'd like to, before I tell you this, refer to something you just said, which is sort of, again, you know, these things people say to you that just strike such a chord. You said you found them so realistic. And my PhD was basically about realism and the fantastic and how you use them as modes rather than be contained by them as genre boxes. And of course, when I was 14, and I'm sure you were the same, although, you know, it is a different era and maybe you did know about these things more. Back when I was 14, there weren't these categories. And if there were, I didn't know about them. So I didn't know that I was writing science fiction, science fantasy. I didn't even think about the genre of categories of writing. And I was actually responding to a couple of real situations in my life which connected. And it may be the same for you. It may be that there was some trigger around the time that you were reading my books that all, you know, things don't just come from one thing. There's a number of threads. And looking back, and because of doing a PhD, I was really looking into my own history and my own way of writing and how it had evolved. So it made me really aware of this. And the two things that were most significant, the most significant thing is that my dad died in a car crash when I was 14. And so I lived in a really tough neighbourhood. I was the eldest of 8 children. And after my dad died, my mum looked after us. She was uneducated. She did her best. We lived in a housing commission neighbourhood. And I always wanted to get out of it somewhere away. I didn't know what to. But behind that is that after my dad was killed by a drunk driver along with 2 other men. And there was a court case, an inquest. And that inquest, the way it evolved, the inquest ended up with the guy who did it, who was drunk, being not charged with anything, just walking away. Weirdly enough, he said, my mum remembers him saying in court as he was leaving the court, "Thank God that's over, now I can go to Queensland." So isn't it weird that this is where I ended up? And the injustice of that, my mother brought that home, and the injustice of that, the injustice of the fact that one day your dad goes to work and never comes home again, that the fact the world is a dark and dangerous place in which that could happen. Many things, you fear so many things as kids, but when something like that happens, all of your fears are given a stone weight. So there was this sense of the world as a dark place, as an unjust place. And right from the start, I was this weird kid who went to school, and in a neighbourhood, we'd moved to this housing commission neighbourhood, and I went to school. It was very rough, and there were gangs of kids who used to beat up weird kids like me. So I spent a lot of my time hiding in the library. So injustice on the macrocosm, injustice on the microcosm. For me, why? What did I ever do to cause that? So much of my time was spent trying to figure out what it was about me, that I wasn't mouthy, I wasn't bold, I just wanted to be invisible if I could have been, and to hide. And even hiding, it wasn't good enough. They would always be waiting. So these were the things around me at the time when my dad died. And there wasn't a place to think in that house with 8 children. There was nowhere to go except inside my own head. And I've always been insomniac. And sometimes I wonder if that isn't, a thing that I generated out of need. And so I often lay awake in the night, or I often wake early in the morning. And I didn't have that feeling with insomnia of, oh, I'm angry, everyone else in the world is asleep. No, I had this feeling of, oh, I'm awake and everyone's asleep. I can just lay here and think. And that's what I did. I used to tell myself stories, and I would imagine this. I had this ongoing story I told myself, which began with me running away from home and ending up in some weird place in the middle of the country and finding this old, monastery or something that was abandoned, and deciding I would live there. I mean, it was very Obernwtyn-ish. Now, I didn't know it at the time. I didn't put the two together at all, but I took that place over and I thought, I'm going to be here and I'm not going to go back where there are other people. And every now and again, someone would come and I would say, well, yeah, you can be here, but this is, we have to look after one another. And so I was running the rules of the place and gradually building up this body of imaginary people I lived with, and we had to grow food, and night by night, I would wait till I woke, and then I would lay there and I would sort of build this imaginary place, which I never did anything with. It was just being built in my mind. And then I started to write, and that's the other space I gave myself, like Harry Potter's room of requirement. And this is a writer, of course. In fact, Kim Wilkins did this really interesting interview with me where she began by asking me, what is time when you write? I tell you, I got goosebumps all over my body when she asked me, because I suddenly realized that when you write, there is no time. Time stops when you write, and it opens out like a flower, and you live inside it for the full, I've got goosebumps now talking about it, for the full length of the time you write. When you're really inside, when you're really writing, that is not producing a commodity for the world to sell, but a real writer going inside their world, whatever kind of world it is, that time stops for you. And that's what it did for me. So there was the insomnia, and then there was this cut out of time when I wrote. And because I told stories all the times to my brothers and sisters, I knew about storytelling, and I learned a lot about how to tell stories, an audience by that means, because we didn't have a television and we were in this house and I was all alone looking after these brothers and sisters. So I did a lot of that too. That was the other half of life. But when I wrote and I started to write, I was only writing down to try and remember some of the things I was telling in these ongoing, melodramatic stories I was telling to they'd get mad if I forgot the eye color of a character or something. So I thought, I'll just write it down. But the minute I put pen to paper, I was writing a story. And it was a completely different experience. It was completely intimate, absolutely private. And unlike the hours in which I lay awake at night and then therefore had to pay the price the next day, because I'm chronically lacking, my daughter tells me I'm going to die years early because of this lack of sleep. But it's allowed me to do a lot. But unlike that, the time when you write doesn't rob you of real world time. It's like bigger inside than out. When you go into it, you can be in there for an hour and you can have traveled years and you come out like out of a dream out of some really long movie that you only had to discover it's still daylight outside. So the time collapses inward. So, that's how writing began for me. It was a place that I went and found that quiet. And of course, the place, what I took into that quiet place, and the less than the insomnia, but when I started to write, for me to write is to think. And I started to think about the things that bothered me. And as I was writing, I wasn't anymore entertaining my brothers and sisters. I was now writing into myself and the things that worried me. And straight away, I was writing about, injustice and the need to be, I wanted to belong to the world. I wanted to find people I could like and be with, but I didn't want to change myself to do it. I didn't want to fit the world. I didn't want to become something in order to, I wanted to find a place. So I wrote into that, and you can see how all that poured straight into the Obernewtyn Chronicles, a journey where she wants to be part of the world, but she also has this very strong, closed off sense of self too. And so those twin streams kind of fed into the story, which is a story, all the books we write, if you look at our bodies of work, and you talked about writing your first novel back then. And part of encouraging a young writer to write more is to do this beautiful thing for them, where they realise what I realised, which is that one book is only one journey, but all the journeys you make are a great tapestry of journeys in which you're often answering just one or two questions that are questions you will never answer with your whole life. There is no truth with a capital T, no answer with a capital A. But there are many small answers, glimpses of parts of the truth that writing takes you to. And the more you write, the bigger that tapestry of understanding of the world gets for you, and also, if you're lucky, for readers as well. So, so that's where that it feeds into other books as well. That was a very long answer. I'm so sorry. I need theories.
I love that. I feel so inspired. I'm like, I want to write now. Like, I need to go to my laptop immediately, because the way that you have explained time is like the most beautiful way anyone is explained or expressed in the way you go into your worlds, and you're there, and you're so right, because you'll go in and then you'll come out and you'll be like, whoa, what just happened? Like, and then you look at the time, you're like, it is like, it's just so amazing hearing about your story and what influenced you. What was the journey for you like to actually publish? What got you to that point?
Someone said to me the other day, I was the least practical person they'd ever met in their whole life. And it's true that I don't ever make practical decisions. I mean, I do. In order to finish a book, as you know well, you do have to have a pragmatic streak. And I consider my tough background. I mean, I wasn't tough. My family wasn't tough, but we were in a tough world. And I consider that surviving that, you had to do it with intellect. You have to do it with imagination. Surviving that, you have to be practical too. You have to find moments, you have to find ways. But the good thing about starting writing so young, and I'm sure you know this too, is that it's hardwired in you. Nothing is going to get, that's before boyfriend, child, anything else in the world, and nothing's going to get in the way of that. And it's the thing in the center of your life. And so everything in my life that came to me came through writing. After I decided at 19 that I'd given it all up. No car, because I might need money for that. No boyfriend, because that might cost me something too. No house where I had furniture I couldn't lift myself. I wanted total independence, and I wanted to live with as little money as possible, and so that I could write, because if you have a job, then you're a slave to the job. Everything you own owns you. So I wasn't going to have any of that stuff. So at 19, I thought, that's it. I'm not going to have any of those things. Writing brought all of them to me in the end. But it is the center of my life, and everything has to live around it. And I can tell you, I'm more ruthless than I could have believed in making sure of that. Even love sometimes takes up too much space, and even that might be too much for someone who wants to focus on writing. As I get older, I feel like, I want to spend my time writing. I want to focus as much as I can on writing, and you need to put things in place to do that. You've got to find ways. Someone tells you their grandmother's got a house that they rent cheaply, and you remember that. You store that away. I don't remember anything, but I remembered that. And, so all the things that will help me to get there. But my journey to publication with the first book was I didn't write, from that background. You don't think you're ever going to get published. You don't think about publication. I never met a writer. I didn't know you could get published even. I guess I thought writers were shining beings on another planet. And so I thought that, that I was writing just for myself. And year after year, I went to university, I became a journalist, and partly to try and find the answers to those big questions. I thought it would lead me there. I thought facts was the way, but it wasn't. At night, I would come home from my journalistic career, work on my fantasy novel, and feel I was going so much deeper in my trying to question and answer the questions that were around me, trying to go deeper with my question than with any story I ever wrote as a journalist. And so I worked on it, and I was on night shift. I was always volunteering because I was insomniac, and also you don't have to make cups of teas for bad-tempered editors. All that stuff they make young journalists do, you don't do in the middle of the night. So I would be on in the middle of the night. Nothing much would happen, except occasionally I would get sent out on a big story, which was tremendously exciting. But the rest of the time, I would break in with a pin to the editor's office, because he had a heater and a really nice desk and a really good typewriter. And in those days, you turn your typewriter up, and so I would get his typewriter. I'd write on his really nice, his really nice marbled work paper, and I type my stories on the back. And one day I'd forgotten one of them in his office, and when he came in, he bellowed. My editors are always people who bellow, men ones anyway. Isobelle, across the office. And I thought, oh God, I left something. And I went in, and of course, there's my story sitting on the end on his nice type, great big stack of it. And he said, is this yours? And I said, yes. And I was trying to make up a reason why that had been really necessary. And he's just halfway through, before I'd got any words out, he said, you ever going to get any of this stuff you write published? And I suddenly realised he'd read it. And the story I'd written at that moment was called The Most Awful Thing in the World. I should finish that story, Anyway, but this tough realist guy who took no shit off anybody, and here he was, having read a story I'd written called The Most Awful Thing in the World, and it was a fantasy. And I thought to myself, if he reads it, maybe it is. Like, I read all the time. Some of that stuff I read is really bad. Maybe I could get published. So I did this only thing I could think of. I got a book, and I realized that inside the front cover of every book, I don't have one here, is just this little writing in which all the publishers' addresses are. And I thought, so I collected a list of addresses out of books I liked. And I sent I quit my job as a journalist, much to my editor's disgust. I had $3,000. And the way I got $3,000, because that was a lot of money to a young cadet, was I went to a solicitor friend, and this is where the pragmatic part comes in. I went to a solicitor friend and I said, I want you to draw up the fanciest, most legal looking document but it can only be a page long, basically saying, give me $30 and you have a share out of whatever I make if this book gets published within 5 years of it, gets accepted within 5 years of it being published. And I said, and he said, well, we'll limit it. I didn't think for a second it was going to happen. So I said, yeah, put a limiter on it. So he limited it to, payments up to however long. And so then I printed them all off, and I talked everyone I knew into buying copies of it. Some I sold 5, some I sold 2. Once a horrible man actually borrowed the manuscript to read it, saying he would buy them all. And I had to get it off him by threatening him. I had to threaten him to get it back off him. I didn't have any copies of it. So I got it. So all that drama aside, I ended up with $3,000. I still had shares, and I thought, I'm sick of selling shares. I can live for a long time on $3,000. So I quit my job, and I lived on that $3,000. I finished the book one last time. I sent it off to the first publisher on my list, and Penguin accepted it. That meant I had to honour the contracts. It was $1,000, and I had to give it away. It was so funny. Anyway, I gave it away, but luckily I had limited it, because It took a long time to come out because I was working with the publishers, and, you know, people got only really tiny little amounts of money. So that's how I got my first book published.
I love that story. What I love about this so much is that just look outside of the box. You can make it happen. I find so many people give up so quickly because the one path that they see, they're like, this is it, this is how I'll do it. And when they can't achieve that, they give up. And I've never understood that. I'm like, no, this is where you get creative. Like, you find different ways. And that's exactly what you did.
And in fact, that's what I think the government does not realise about creatives, that yes, we plough huge amounts of money into the economy, which they fail to notice, all of that stuff. But it's not just that. Creativity in thinking is so valuable because of exactly what you said. It lets you see out of the box. I play chess, and I'm a chess fanatic. And within 2 moves, almost of every game I ever play, I lose my queen. I don't know why. And my daughter says, you sacrifice your queen. I said, I'm not sometimes I sacrifice her, but I lose her really fast. And then I'm absolutely dogged. I stay on the board and I often win anyway, even though the other person's got all their pieces. And I lose 2 or 3 really important pieces and I've got nothing. If I've got one pawn, I will not surrender. I will chase the queen around with the pawn if I can. And so, and I often play with people who, when they see they're going to lose, give up. And I always say, I never, ever give up. I never surrender. You know, I'll surrender if they surrender. They make me surrender. Because they don't want to play. They see they're going to win and they don't want to play to the end. I don't care that you're going to win. I care about how much longer I can last. Maybe you'll make a stupid mistake too. People often do. So, dogged persistence.
I love that so much. What was the aha moment for you? So when you were like, every author has it differently, and every author's level of success or what they consider to be success is different. So what was your moment where you sort of thought, oh my goodness, this is my life, I've made it, or this is what I wanted?
I think being shortlisted, I was shortlisted for the first book, and you'd think that would do it. I won awards for the second book, you'd think that would do it. The third book, you'd think that would do it. But it was the fourth one. Until the fourth one came along and I won Book of the Year. People kept asking me, journalists who were interviewing, because of all those other prizes, kept asking me, was I ever going to write a real book? And it used to drive me mad. It meant one of 2 idiotic things. One was, are you going to write a book that is the genre of realism? Because obviously fantasy can't say anything real, which of course I don't believe at all. And the other thing is, do you think you'll write for real people, as in adults as opposed to kids, because kids are not real. I'll play humans. So both of these questions annoyed the crap out of me. And so I decided, really? You want real? I'll give you real. I will give you real with kids. So I wrote The Gathering. And of course it went fantastic as well. But it was, you know, it was dealing with some really dark stuff and some really tough stuff around my life at the time too. And when it won Book of the Year, I remember thinking, this might be actually, I might really be able to write, you know, maybe it's not just a fluke, because I still, right up until then, I don't know who I thought wrote those other 3 books. I just felt like somehow I cheated, or, you know, that I tricked everybody into thinking it was, and they discover the truth about me. Cinderella complex. I really felt that. But when the 4th book came along, and it was so solidly successful, and it's still the most successful, you know, it sold more than anything else I've ever written. Not the Obernewtyn Chronicles, they too have amassed a big readership now, but, you know, that book, it's being studied again on the school list this year. And a school just invited me to come and speak, or to speak about it. And I thought, wow, to have written a book that actually transcends, that was so long ago. That was decades ago that I wrote that book. And yet I still feel it's as relevant more relevant to the world we live in now than it was back then. It just goes to show you how you can write something that isn't fixed in time, you know, and what a classic is basically something that transcends the author's lifetime, I think, and lasts and is significant for people beyond that time. Don't you think?
I agree. I'm curious, do you think you were always conscious about the themes that you were writing? So obviously, especially when you start off young, you're writing a story, and at that point it's more so of a form of escapism, or just, you know, really realizing you're a creative, I guess. But it wasn't for me personally. It wasn't probably until I'd started publishing a fifth, sixth book, I'd been in it for a couple of years, that I started realizing the strong themes that I'd put on each book. And it's actually when I talk to younger authors or new authors, I always say, make sure you know what themes you're putting in. What are your points? What are the things that you're questioning, as you say? What are the questions you're putting in there? And realizing the power that you have in that book, because for those who love that book, for the readers who enjoy it, even if they don't consciously realize they're picking up on that question or theme, it's a responsibility almost. So what would you say, when did you realize you were always putting in these themes and, I don't know, just creating a platform of your thoughts out there?
I think I had another aha moment, but I think with these kinds of, when I was talking before about that tapestry, once you begin to build the tapestry, I think you see those themes very clearly yourself because of the questions people ask you, letters they write to you, all of the stuff that's coming to you. I think towards you, I think you recognize those things, but individually, I feel I often know I'm asking a question. The thing I'm writing at the moment, the question inside it is, what is it to be human? Do we have to evolve beyond humanity? Have we evolved in some dark directions beyond humanity? And what are we evolving into? I mean, what is human? Is it just something in a flesh-shaped form? Or is it a machine with a mind? Or, what could it be? And so that came from, I recognized the theme because I was on my physiotherapist's table moaning about my sore neck and my ratty knees because of, ski accidents. And she said something about, well, if you could clone I said, if only I could clone my body and put myself into a new body. And she said, well, what, would your brain be cloned? And I said, well, no. And of course, you straight away answer the questions fictionally. I said, well, no, your brain would be moved across. All the rest would be cloned. And she said, what, as a child? And I said, well, no, it'd have to be now. And so after I left that session, I thought about, so what would it be? What would you grow the body? And then how would it grow? So I start playing with the idea a bit. And then I start asking people, would you do it? Would you do it? And every answer that someone gives me is fascinating because they all have their own reasons for wanting to change. And it's an interesting question. I love having a question to ask that skips over, how are you? What are you working on? Straight to the heart of them as human beings. What questions their humanity? And once a question is asked of me or it comes up in conversation, then I start asking it left, right, and centre. And it begins to build up kind of a blobby mass of thought. And at some point, it begins to coalesce into, or the next time I was on her table, she said to me, so did you decide whether you do it or not? Translate. And I said, it's funny, I've been asking, and then we had a whole long conversation. And as I left again, I thought, she's going to be the main character. I will make a physiotherapist the main character. But because we're talking about body transfer, it's going to have to be set in the future. And I don't think much about what that future will look like. I sit down and I start to write about Joe, who is massaging a customer and talking about this possibility. And as I move through the story, as she goes home, I have to get her home somewhere. She's in a dome, I've decided. So I look through the dome and think, what would you see out there? You see, I'm not creating externally. I'm not creating a world, then putting the character in it. I'm building the world from inside the character. And in that character is the question. That character is the vessel that will carry the question, which I might recognize already. I do now, or else because I've been talking about it, or partway through the story might come to me that this is a theme I've dealt with before, or I might not see it till the end. Sometimes you don't see it until someone in an audience asks you a question and you think, oh my God, I did. Yeah. And then of course you have your tapestry. The more you build it up, the more you realize. And you see, in that book, I dealt with it this way. So your tapestry has books that go like this, but you can see your growth of your idea like a warp through the weft or the weft through the warp. And that's fascinating to me as a writer. What am I doing with that idea? Like sometimes you see you've reused a character and they're older and they've got the same question. And in this different situation, they're not exactly, sometimes they really are the same character. And you think, what happened to that character? And so this is all kind of fascinating to me too. So that's how, the idea kind of comes, and that's how the notion of ethics comes to me. The actual aha moment, though, is I've been reading Ursula Le Guin for years, and she's that writer who's formative for me. And one day while I was reading her, I read a book by Enid Blyton called The Land of Far Beyond. Do you know it?
No.
It's not a common one, and I know Enid Blyton is racist and all outmoded in many ways. If you're into cancel culture and all the rest of it, but I see that sort of. I didn't know that when I read them when I was young. I can't read The Magic Faraway Tree now. I don't like it at all as an adult, but I loved it as a kid. And but this particular book is a bit different. It's a retelling of Paul Bunyan's A Pilgrim's Progress, which is the story of a spiritual journey a person makes to heaven, basically. But what the Land of Far Beyond does is tell a story of a bunch of people who have manifested for them by a man in this dark city. All of the burdens that they carry are manifested on their back as a big backpack that's terribly heavy. And he says to them, you carry such terrible burdens. They don't believe him. He makes manifest them. They see them. They want them off. He can't take them off. They have to go to the land of far beyond, and they have to make a long journey. So what it is basically is the spiritual journey turned into a real journey where people walk in the snow, almost drown, have to make food, but it's a spiritual journey. It's a spiritual journey turned inside out. And reading that book, I borrowed that book from my school library year after year after year. I was the only person who ever borrowed it. And in the end, I stole it because I couldn't bear the thought of living without it. I couldn't live without that book. And I didn't even have to read it. I just had to know it was there in case I needed it. And years later, the aha moment came when I suddenly realized why it mattered to me, because that book was doing what I was doing. It was a recognition book. It was one of those books where you suddenly think, that's what I'm doing. I'm writing inside journeys as outside journeys. That's what my characters are doing. What they're doing is they're traveling through lands. And if you look at the landscapes and the cities, everything that you see in my worlds, they're not out there. They actually emanate. You can see how I wrote them from inside the character, but they also resonate to the spiritual or emotional journey that the character is making. So they're really important, but they rise out of the story. They're not a board on which the story would happen, like a Monopoly board. They're actually an essential part of the story. They're a character, and they're a surrounding character, like the skin surrounds the body as an organ you don't think of as an organ. So is that character, the shape of the story, the place where it happens is really important on that level, as well as being a place that seems realistic. It doesn't have to be real. It just has to feel real.
Do you have a writing routine? Because I know that every author is different, and some authors will be like, I will write 5,000 words a day. And some authors are just like, I can't, the creative flow comes through when it needs to come through. What is your writing practice?
Well, again, this is where the pragmatism rules. I don't think inspiration very often comes to you when you're not working. I think mostly it comes when you are deeply engaged in your idea, which is not to say writing while writing. It means that you work every day and you might have an inspiration there, or you might have it an hour later washing the dishes, but it only happened because you were working in the morning and your head is full of your idea. So that's the first thing. You have to be working in order to be inspired. The muse will not come otherwise. And sometimes the muse doesn't come and you plod away anyway. I don't have a good work ethic. I'm just simply obsessed. And that's much easier because I don't have any choice. I get up in the morning and today I made myself go for a walk because my physiotherapist, who it sounds like she rules my life, but I just went again last night because I pulled him up. You sit so often, and I'm more uncomfortable sitting for these long hours as time passes. And I just want to take care of myself so that I can keep on writing. And so she said to me, you have to walk. So I got up this morning and thought, walking, I could write, but no, I'll walk first and then I can write. So, and I was giving an interview, so I thought it'll wake my brain up. So I went for a walk and came back. So normally I would get up, I would make a cup of tea, and that's the thing that I have first. I make a cup of tea. I either go for a swim just in the pool here, which has got a sort of about half a lap long, or a lap long. And I swim up and down the pool, and then I come and I sit down I have my tea, I swim, I sit down, I make a coffee. That's the second thing I have in my mouth in a day. And then I write. And I write until I can't sit comfortably anymore. And if it's hot, as it is often up here, I go for another swim, or I do some of the stuff I have to do. I try not to leave the house. I try to have a second bout of writing. And if I've got stuff to do and I'm on a roll, I will chuck everything I've got to do out the window and I will write. There's a bookshelf I really want to get at a Lifeline 5 minutes up the road. And do you think I've been able to get myself out the door? No, because my book is on a roll. I want to get on with it. Today I've got to meet somebody for lunch. I've got to go out to a play for dinner and there won't be much time to write. And as I feel anxious about that already, I don't like it, that I can't, that I won't be able to write. But I am going through a very serious bout of insomnia at the moment. So my secret thought is I can get up in the night and make up for it. I can write in the night. So it's like an addiction, but a good one, if it's good. Maybe my daughter's right and I will die months before.
What would you say? I find one thing that's very common in writers and authors is, as you just said, the word guilt. And a lot of people, if they have, say, an off day, or if they, like this week, for example, I've only written 3,000 words and I hate myself for it. And it's like so terrible, but you're like, I could have been productive, but it's been, life happens, everything's social. But a lot of authors feel guilty about not writing. And it came even for me about halfway. I've been doing this for about 7 years. And it wasn't until I'd been into it about 4 years, I'm like, pressure is good, but I need to speak kindly to myself and not beat myself up because I'm not meeting unrealistic or very hard expectations. So would you say it's like as long as you're still being kind to yourself, it is okay to have off days, but then there maybe is a line where maybe procrastination, like there can be too much procrastination perhaps?
Yeah, well, I mean, I do have this pragmatic streak, which does keep me working. And I don't feel my feet are on the ground in a day unless I've had some time to write. So I need to be allowed to write some of a day. No matter what, I have to write some of the day. It's not so much, it feels like guilt sometimes, but I think it's more just a real anxiety about being allowed to write. I've just done it for so many years. A day passes when I don't do it and I start to feel, I feel anxious if I'm not able to write in a day. And a day like this that's really full, that speaking kindly is very important. And I have to say to myself, look, it's all grist to your mill, girl. You will go out there and you will talk about your writing because it's in your head. You'll bore the crap out of everybody. And that's a good thing, not for them, but for you. You will go out there and it's all in your head and out it will come out your mouth. And those people, those poor people, they asked you. So they're going to get it. They can't help it. And so I am going to burden my friends with whatever's going on in my head. Part of me knows that will be a valve of release, but I also know that I'm going to see things like I'm going to a play, I'm going to play chess with a friend. So those things always stir up my imagination too. The person I'm playing chess with will do the illustrations for the novella that I'm writing. So I'm excited to tell her it's got really dark and I hope she can draw that. So there's that as well. So I comfort myself and coddle myself by telling me all the good things about what it is out there in the world that I'm going to do that will make me a better writer. But the other aspect is, and this is a really good thing for a writer to develop, I think, I am a hedonist. That means when I go across the road and swim in that, when I go, into the yard and I swim in that pool, when I'm swimming up and down the pool, I'm not thinking about writing. I'm thinking, that cloud looks so beautiful. And I love the way, and I'm out there and I am 100%. A bat flies over and I watch the bat fly over and I watch a bird land and I look at the way the wind, I don't look at anything. I live 100% in the moment. And when I'm, whatever I'm doing, I'm 100% in that moment. So I'm not, what's the point in regretting where you could be doing whatever? Otherwise you're just cheating yourself on all fronts. Whereas if you go out, do what you do full-hearted and live vigorously and suck it all in, because it's all input for you. It's input time. And then you go home, and when you can write, you've built up a head of steam and you've got output. All this material, which is there, which you may or may not use, which will mulch and stir up what's there. And when you begin to write, you're writing, you're always porous, I hope, when you write. I am. And it gets in. Some of it will come into your writing. And it'll be all the more vigorous. And the very fact that you haven't been allowed to write means you're hungry to write. That means the chances that you're going to stop or muck around or do something, no, that doesn't happen. Do you notice that on the days when you've got a full day, you mess around half the day, but on the days when you've got 2 hours, You work in those 2 hours. So tell yourself that also. And on the days when there's heaps of time, be a hedonist some of the time. Go for a walk, go eat some lunch, sit and read a book for a while, dream for a bit. Don't feel guilty, because all the things we're doing are part of being a writer. And there's a lot of writing while not writing that goes on. So that when you think you're sitting there procrastinating, in fact, if you think about writing as like an iceberg, and beneath the level of the water is everything that's going on in your subconscious. And the top bit is only what you're working on, when you're sitting down or consciously thinking about the piece of writing. It's like when you've had a problem and you can't solve it in your piece of fiction, and you go away and you've got to do 10 things and you're really annoyed because you need to solve that problem. And then you go into those 10 things and you get involved in those and you come back and you suddenly know what the answer is. Who did that work? You did. Your subconscious had time to do it while you were not gnawing away at it up the top. You just left it alone for a bit, and that's good too. But of course, you've got to be sensible. You've got to look at your working. If you know that you normally work 2 or 3 hours a week and you haven't done that, then stuff's getting in the way. And maybe you need to try and, elbow some space out, because the world will consume every second, because everyone, even knowing you're a writer, always thinks the writing is the thing you do when you're not with other people, with them. But everyone who you talk to thinks that. That means there would be literally no time to write in. So you have to be ruthless and elbow away everything in order to get the time you need to write, And if they love you, they have to take what they get. And that makes me sound so, I am that. It makes me sound what I am, which is determined to be a writer, despite all the things in the world that try to stop you. And they are legion.
One thing I want to discuss with you is your love for travel, because I have to admit, like when I started writing myself, I was a country girl, and so obviously my worldly experiences were very limited. And it wasn't until I was about 3 years into it that I went to America, and then I was like, oh wow, this is amazing. And then I did UK, and then I was moving internationally, and just so much travel in those years. And my writing developed so much because of it, because of the different cultures, of all the different sightseeing, of meeting different people, putting myself out there as an independent young woman that I would have never done before because I was too scared. And I just feel like it's really inspired and built not only me personally, but for my writing. And you travel often, obviously not now, but you travel often, and you do a lot of traveling in Australia as well. So would you say a lot of that has massively influenced your writing, just experiencing all those different places?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I wasn't, some people want to travel right from the beginning. That was not me. I traveled for writing, and it took me overseas, and it took me places and way outside of my comfort zone. Little housing commission girl. I may have had a wonderful imagination, but I didn't have, like you, I was scared of everything really. And I think, sometimes I think politically, as Australians, as a blob, we are that scared kid that is frightened to go outside of our own neighbourhood, and frightened to find out someone might think something different. And, oh my God, if we should bump into someone different than us. I think that's culturally Australia in general. And, I think I just read it the other day, someone, maybe Emerson, said, if you want to grow, travel. And that speaks to us as writers as well. So I do think travel, I grew like you did. And because of where I came from, I grew hugely in travel. Sometimes you go back into, and you take yourself back into that world, and it has to stretch to fit you in. So that's good too. And back and forwards, you never quite belong anywhere when you travel anymore. And I've got more and more gypsified as I got older, to the point that I'm living in, my friend's bedroom downstairs now, in her laundry, basically. She talks about me living under her stairs. And I can go home. I could go home and live in my great house on the Great Ocean Road, but I don't feel like going there. And I've got almost no stuff with me. And I don't feel I need to have too much. I've got stuff in an apartment in Prague. I've got stuff at home I've got stuff all over the world. And I like it, but I don't need it. I learned when I traveled overseas the first time how little you could have and be happy. And so none of that stuff owns me. I do have an anchor in my heart to Apollo Bay, to my house there. And I go back there regularly. COVID stopped that, and I do feel a need to go back there for a while. But in general, no, I'm interested to travel more soon as again possible. I think it's to do with not being comfortable. I mean, I was saying to someone the other day about relationships that I actually don't want to, most people would say if you want to ask them what their reason for life is or what do they want, they'll say to be happy. I don't care about that. That's just ephemeral. I'm happy right now talking to you, but we couldn't predict this. And we couldn't predict that the day would be beautiful, that the coffee would be great, that you were asking great questions, that I'd be having a good time. We couldn't predict any of that. And yet it happened. And in this moment, I don't want to be anywhere in the world but here talking to you on this because I'm enjoying myself. And so in this moment, I live where I am. And, in an hour, I'll be sort of in Wynnum playing chess on a blanket on the grey grass. And that will be nice too. And I'll love every minute of that. But it won't be comfortable. I've got to make this trip. I have to get stuff together. We're outside. Whether or not she likes it, I don't know. We'll see. And when I travel again, I don't have enough money. I often travel without enough money to get back, thinking, well, I'll think of something and something will happen. And of course, I know, like every privileged person in the world, that I can ring my mum and say, Mum, can you send me some of your little stash? And she will. So, and I have 100 friends who would do it for me too, but I don't. So I have that big safety net, but I learned that I had that. I didn't have that when I was first traveling. You couldn't email home for money. Back then, I couldn't have got to my mum if I'd have been overseas. Sometimes I was in trouble in countries where I couldn't do any of that, and I still survived. So I learned that I could survive on almost nothing. I learned that I'm resilient. And, that's a great thing to discover you're resilient. Come the zombie apocalypse, I'm ready. I can cope. I know where I can hide. I know who can cook. I know who can produce what's needed. I feel free. And if I would say, I looked at the very first version I'd written of Obernewtyn, which I donated to the Lou Rees archives, and it's so badly written that I have put a rider on it that no one can look at it till I'm dead. That's how bad the very first version is. But the very first line of that story, I was shocked to realize this was the first line. It says something like, "Oh, freedom." That's the very first words that book is. And I sometimes look back and think that speech that Elspeth made, which of course is gone in time, which was really me, was what it means to be free. That's all I want. And that's what she was saying in the beginning. And I feel I reached that, but you have to fight for it. It's like anything, like justice, like being independent, like being a writer. It's not a given, and it's not a static state. It's not a destination. You spend your life fighting for the right to be allowed to do the things that you want and for the things that you believe in. And you have to, and the only reason you stop is where your right and your desires comes up against somebody else's. And then you have to decide what harm. And then my second, other than freedom, my second, way of living, my second, what would I call it? Aphorism kicks in. And that's the aphorism that says, the doctors have, which is do no harm. First, do no harm. So at the end of my freedom is where I come up against first, do no harm. I'm like a robot. That's the two rules of human existence. First, freedom. So yes, not to be happy and travel. It's uncomfortable many, many times. Like when we think about trips, you and I, we were talking before we started to speak on camera about Scotland and about Japan and stuff like that. As well as I do, that you can be stuck for hours at the airport. They can mess up your flights. You can end up in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night. Actually, with difficulties, you can be cold, you can be hungry, you can eat crappy food you think is going to kill you from a heart attack and be stuck somewhere. And we are lucky. Think of all those people who travel or live in circumstances that are so much less comfortable. I don't want to be comfortable in a world where so many people are not comfortable. And I want to live. I want to live passionately. I want to be free as I can. I don't want to do any harm. In fact, I want to do what good I can when it's in front of me, sort of thing. So I guess all those things, travel promotes those ideas and those thoughts for me. Maybe it generated them, many of them in the first place, or perhaps, supported them and made them stronger, maybe. Who knows? Chicken and egg, I think.
It's so, I feel so inspired talking to you because you are so passionate, but also the thing that I love as well is, so I practice law of attraction. And so that may not be a practice that you do, but a lot of the things that you were saying very much resides with that, is just, with having intent on your day. Sorry?
What is that? Tell me that. That sounds interesting.
Okay, so law of attraction. Have you ever read the book The Secret or heard the film The Secret? So basically, what law of attraction is manifestation. So when you can visualize, say, if you want a particular thing like this particular, say, car, or if you want a relationship to yourself, and what you do is believe that you are in that moment, that you have already obtained that and achieved that because you're worthy of that. So it's just basically the power of intent and visualization together. And so what it does is basically, because your mind can't differentiate the difference between, like time and reality and stuff. So if you're visualizing this and you think it's real, your mind thinks that it's real. So it works on basically energy, so the energy of the universe, and it draws it to you. So it's basically making a little request to the universe, I would love a cat, and then whatever, but it may not come the way. You might not be given a kitten. You may end up having a stray on your back that just doesn't leave. Like, it's just, and when you're talking about intent, and just, in your day, and you're like, but I will write when I get back. That's what I find interesting, is you already know when you're living in the moment, you're enjoying watching the crows and the clouds. You're just very in the moment. You've got intent and you've got passion, and I just find it very, very inspiring. And that was actually leading up to my next question, was why is it so important for you to give back to the writing community? Because you are quite active.
Yes. Well, when I was younger, I wouldn't have thought I had anything to tell anybody. I mean, I was just trying to survive. And it was very much like, every now and again you go on a talk and people thank you for writing your books. And I always feel a little bit weird about that, because it was a purely selfish pursuit for my own survival and my own comfort and happiness. And first, that's what it is for me now. It's a way of processing the world. It's like someone thanks you for your eyeballs, because you can see with them. And so in a way it's weird, but I understand, because I would thank writers I've loved exactly the same way. But from the point of view of being that writer, I started out feeling I didn't have much to say to anybody. It wasn't an outward kind of urge, writing for me. Once it was published, and I was being published as a journalist, I saw that you could produce material that the world might like. And it was nice. It was actually really nice to have someone read your things and like them, or understand you, or hear what you were saying, or get what you were saying. I, who had not been able to find a way, I can't tell you how many, frankly, toilet doors as a kid I hid behind, waiting for recess to end so I could safely get to the school or go home, thinking if I could just go out there and I could tell those people something, and they would understand why I'm not a person they should beat up, why they should like me. And I composed speeches, which I, of course, never delivered. And I always wondered, if only I'd had the courage to step out, what might that have changed in my life? Well, maybe what happened actually is that I found that voice in writing in a long loop around once the stuff came out, and I realized people did listen to me. Once in a couple of years ago, I went into a video shop in Lorne on the way down the Great Ocean Road. And we were just going down for a single night, which is a 3-hour drive there, 3-hour drive back. I was taking my daughter, and she wanted something to watch, and ours is a dead zone, and I keep it that way. So I said, all right, we can get one video, but we'll stop here and get it, and then we can drop it off on the way back. So we pulled into this place, we go in, and the man behind the counter, his face was really familiar to me. And I could tell he recognized me too. And this was, this was back when The Gathering was published. So it was a long time ago in my career. It was a while ago. And was it that or something? Anyway, something had just come out and won something. And so I thought, well, maybe, there were stories in the newspaper. Maybe he recognized me from paper or something, which is always a little bit weird. Anyway, I went looking, and I kept looking at him, and I thought, I swear I know him in some other circuit. I know him. It's not that he knows me. I know him too. So finally I found the movie. We go up to the counter, and I put the movie down, and I said, do I know? And he said, you're Isobelle Carmody. And I said, yeah, do we know one another? And he said, we went to school together. And I said, oh, okay. So we did the transaction, and I start to head for the door. And as I'm heading for the door, I suddenly remembered the last time I had seen that guy, he had me on the ground kicking me at school. And I looked back, and he had this kind of wry, sarcastic, amused look on his face. And I looked at him and I thought, you just sold me a video and I just won Book of the Year. And I just smiled at him and I walked out. Now, it's not to say he could have owned that shop, and owning a video shop in Lorne is a pretty big thing. I just mean that in that moment, for me personally, that was a very triumphant moment. And I realized that I could shed that past literally couldn't touch me anymore. And therefore there was something that I could say, because there were so many writers out there like me who didn't have a voice. And again, it was around that gathering time, I think, when I really felt I had a big platform in that time. People actually felt that I had something to say. And I discovered I did, not just in writing, but about the world and stuff like that. So, yeah, so I did find that I had a second voice. I came to that other voice as well, and putting stuff back into your own field. Why wouldn't you? Because out there are writers who are like you, writing books which I'm going to enjoy reading. You don't stop reading when you become a writer. You just love it all the more. And it's lovely to see people come through. I mean, it's so beautiful what you said about meeting me when you were writing or finished your first book, and now having written countless books and now a full-time writer. To have you come back and us talk again. Isn't that beautiful? Why wouldn't I want to be? And also it's a fascinating journey, which we can share really with one another and other writers, other people making this journey. I think every human being could profit by writing something, creating something. We should all be creators. But these conversations with creators give me the opportunity to speak to people who care about the things I do, who understand the details of what it is to be a writer in the way that I do. Doing a PhD did that even more, in a more sort of specific way, because I had to find a way to use that academic language, which seems to begin with a language just to obscure things and to promote itself by obscurity. But in fact, it's a very beautiful, specific, it's a language that allows you to speak very particularly and specifically about what you do. And so in learning that language, and it was a vertical curve for me, in learning that language, I learned how to talk about my own writing in ways that I wasn't able to before. And to go right back to the very beginning of this interview, when you talked about, something about my writing being real, how it delights me to hear that, and to know that the answer I would have given you when we first met is now vastly more complex and nuanced than the answer I could give you now. And that's what I learned by having those conversations, and that's the other way to grow, of course. Grow by travel, but also grow by conversing with other people of like minds too.
What would you say that your greatest challenge and greatest accomplishment has been in your writing career so far?
Greatest challenge. I guess these days I feel like finishing is in. I know you have to, and that's again where the pragmatic streak has to come in, but I'm forever, halfway through something, getting a really good idea that's just so enticing, and I start writing. At the moment, I'm trying to finish 2 things so I can finish another thing and then finish another thing, all of which are wanted. And the one I'm working on is wanted least. That's the lack of practicality. I know that but I have to work with whatever it is in that tapestry that somehow is speaking to me in this moment. So that's the challenge, to kind of, to stay on task and finish something. And I really, at this point in my life, I really, really have to do that. I really have to try and kind of discipline myself, which, being a hedonist, that isn't easy to do. It's because I don't discipline myself. What looks like a disciplined work ethic is, as you see, pure obsession and delight. It's just the finishing thing and dragging yourself, to the end of the story. Like, I kind of know where it's going. Once you start to figure out where a story's going, you think, oh, but I've got to get through that now to get to, I don't know. Yeah, finishing, that's one challenge. The greatest accomplishment would be when I had decided to write the Little Fur books. And I realized that if I sent them to a publisher, the story to the publishers, they would want an illustrator. And I didn't want anyone to draw Little Fur in a way that wasn't the way that my daughter and I had always drawn her, like I'd always drawn her for my daughter. And so I thought, well, I'll just say I want to draw it. So I had a $3 paint box. I painted the characters. I painted 4 little on supermarket paper. I painted these 4 little pictures, and I sent them with an outline of the story which I'd done, but I didn't want them to have it because I might not sell it to them, to my publisher. And because I was scared they'd say no, I did this thing you're not supposed to do. I sent it to 4 separate publishers at the same time, thinking I know one of them will accept. It's a long way down the frame of possibilities, and I might not do that, but I need it to be accepted by somebody. So I sent off these 4, all with the same pictures, and they all accepted it. And that was really horrific. That was very embarrassing. And at the time I was having a bit of a struggle with Penguin. I was unhappy about something contractually, and I didn't feel they had won a battle, and I felt like, you've won the battle, but this is not the war. And I don't fit that loyalty that I had felt was weakened by that battle. And so I had another publisher I really liked, to which an editor I loved had gone, and she'd said yes. And I thought, I'll give it to her. And because my own publisher didn't come back and didn't respond at all, I was in the process of selling it to this person. And the day we were meant to meet to sign the contract, she couldn't come. And in between then, I had a dinner I had to go to with my publisher, and I was pretty huffy at the dinner. And by the end of the dinner, they'd realised something was wrong. They wanted me to, in the middle of the dinner, one of the people at the dinner said, the publisher said, what do you want to do with this, Isobelle? No, what are you doing for us now, Isobelle? And I said, well, frostily. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone else pull out a yellow envelope I recognised. That was the one my pictures were in. This is a table at which there were illustrators and writers. I was horrified. Paul Jennings was sitting right there. And I said, don't you dare. Don't you show these in front of all these people. Don't you humiliate me. I mean, I never illustrated anything, and here were these drawings. And she started to put them back, and Paul's wife of the time, Claire, reached across and grabbed them, took them out and spread them across the table. And everyone really reacted very positively to them, like, oh my God. And Paul said, I would write a story to this. And so they reacted so strongly. I was surprised, but I was still pretty huffy. Anyway, the publisher said to the person who'd pulled the yellow envelope out, so we want this, don't we? And I said, he said, so we've got this, we're having this, aren't we? And I looked at her and I said, well, that is, no, you haven't got this. You know, I got no response from anybody, and I have another publisher that I'm negotiating with. And he said, but you haven't signed yet, have you? And I said, no, but I'm going to. And he said to her, we want this book. And I said, okay. He said, come on, we're going. And I said, no, I'm leaving now. So I packed my stuff up and left. And when I stayed with a friend that night, and when I got back to my car the next day, I'd left my phone in it, and there were 19 missed calls from Penguin after me. And I called the publisher and I said to her, no, I said, look, I'm signing with somebody else. And she said, is it so-and-so? And I said, yes, it is. And she said, look, I think you should, for your sense in your career, you should let us make you an offer. And I said, I don't think you can make me an offer. And she said, we will make you an offer you can't refuse. And for me, who never, I just thought, maybe I should listen to this. So I went back the next day. I came back again. They made me come back again. And I came into the office. They took me out to a fancy lunch. And then she said to me, Isobelle, what do you want for this series? And I said, you said you were going to make me an offer I couldn't refuse. And she said, oh God. So we went back to the office. Anyway, the long thing is she ended up making me an offer I couldn't refuse. I did refuse it at home, and I got home and I thought, I don't want this. I'm still really mad. And my brother said, look, if you say more, what are they going to do? They're not going to say, well, we're not publishing you then. No, you can just default to what they offered. So with great trepidation, I wrote back and said, okay, I'll take it. And they accepted it. They accepted it. So there was I. Published. I had to then go to my lovely editor from the other publisher and apologise and say, look, I can live for years on this. I can live for a long time as a writer on this. I need to take it. You can't offer me anywhere near that amount of money. And so that was the agreement altogether. So that was how it happened. Yes.
What a win. Congratulations. What a win.
Yeah. But you can see how, nothing is fixed. how there were so many chances involved in all of this. You know, if I'd had that conversation pragmatically, you know, if they'd responded more quickly, if it had happened slightly differently, it would have happened in a different way. But the triumph wasn't signing that contract, though that was the biggest contract I'd signed to that date by a lot. It was that I could draw, that they all reacted like this to my drawings. And then I won second book of the year again, and I won it for a book I had illustrated. And that was when I really felt that it's not, because they don't just award the book, they award the writing and the illustrations. So in that moment, I felt that was a real triumph. That made me so happy. So yeah, there's that.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I'm just about to bring out the final one in that series.
That's exciting. When does that one come out?
It was meant to come out July last year. It's going to come out July this year.
Amazing.
So yeah. So that was very exciting. It's the last illustrated thing I've got on the docket, on my docket, which is a bit sad.
I love that you did this because you wanted to illustrate this as what your daughter and you had always seen. That is so rewarding to have that published and rewarded in such an amazing way. I love that. That's beautiful.
You know, having argued it, all I had done ever was a couple of drawings. And then I had to draw 70 to 100 pen and ink drawings and a cover for 4 books. And when I sat down and started to realize what I had got myself into, I nearly died. And I worked so hard on those illustrations. And when I bought them into Penguin, thinking, really, you know, I spent a year doing them. And when I bought them in, and I'd done 130 illustrations. And when I bought them in, they were tiny, meticulous. I drew them with a dipping pen, which blobbed on every second one. I had to redo it over a tiny little crabbed. It took me hours to draw a circle that small because it was cross-hatched. It was all black and white. So I did all this stuff. I loved every single second of drawing it. I loved it so much. But when I took it in, I thought, well, I'm no illustrator. At some point, I thought, I don't know anything about perspective. And so, you know, perspective is obviously going to be out the window, or I'm going to have to go and learn to be an illustrator. So I just won't think about perspective. That won't be part of my drawings. So I sat down and I drew all these things and I focused on what I thought I was good at. And then I took them in, like in a big folder to Penguin, thinking, all right, I have to face them when I do it because I need to see what they think. And so I had these illustrations and I brought them out and, you know, their reaction was astonishing. And I was just so gratified, so happy. They didn't expect anything like what I produced. And that was really, really, really good. I mean, they still make me look good with the way they kind of, you know, don't cut any of the drawings. I thought they'd rearrange something, but no, they use them exactly as is. And so that was very, very gratifying, that moment. Their reaction to those very first drawings I bought in, 130 illustrations that were all meticulously drawn. That was something. That was really something.
Did you do much artwork prior to that? Were you much of a hobbyist artist?
I'd never drawn anything for anybody, but I'd always drawn right from when I was young, you know, just doodles on the side of the page or drawing things when Adelaide and I listened to a lot of audiobooks. And when we were listening to audiobooks, we would draw. So in her childhood, I drew a great deal, but not for any reason. You know, I didn't draw illustrations or anything, but I liked textures and we would buy drawing books and we would try different things out. But I certainly had no idea of what I was getting myself into. Really, when I look back, I don't know how I had the gall. I don't know how I had the gall.
What would you say your 3 top writing tips are for writers?
Well, the first one is don't give up on things you start. No, the first one would be, that's the second one. The first one would be don't write things down immediately. Carry them with you. Think about them. Research them, which means if you're writing about spaceships, just read some books, read some fiction about spaceships, you know, have a few conversations. If you've got your characters facing some kind of conundrum, ask around, see what people think if it were them in that situation. Listen to the stories they tell you. Just gather it all together. And so that you've got, you know, you're filling up your subconscious. You don't have to take notes. It's all in there. And just take it in. And the more you converse about it, the more dense and detailed your ideas will be. And wait until you're ready to write. And when you do write things down, don't give up when it gets a bit hard. Try to write fast and get out a full draft. Don't waste too much time thinking about how beautiful the words should be. Just get the story down. And unless you're the kind of writer for whom the writing is itself the thing. If you're a storyteller, which is what I am, so I'm speaking from that angle, get the story out there first. And once you've got the story in front of you, then comes the other truly creative aspect, and that is, reworking the story, editing it, changing it, shaping it, digging into it to see what you've got there, and allowing yourself time for your ideas to go down into your subconscious and come back up saturated with all your life matter and stuff like that. So persist and go forward, and don't give up, but also to remember, that's about 7, isn't it? But to remember, you need to let your subconscious do some work too, that there is time for your subconscious to do, and it's a dialogue. Maybe to go with that first one about talking, it's a dialogue between you and the world, an idea. And eventually you will give the idea back as a story. But in the meantime, it's an idea you're bouncing. You can think of it as bouncing it back and forward a little bit, playing with it, doing a few, throwing it against the wall a bit before you actually start to write. And then you retreat inward, write only for yourself. Don't write for an audience. Don't write for a publisher. Don't write for a prize. Don't write to fulfill, the ideals that Shirley Hazard gives you about what good writing is. Don't put that in front of you as the hurdle you have to climb before you can write your story. Somehow, if you can pass that into 3 rules, those would be there. Don't give up.
I'll take them. I love that. I'll take them. Accepted. What is your goal? What is the dream that you were chasing for yourself that you perhaps haven't yet obtained? And that's what you want to grab onto next.
This one, I just would like to be able to write more. There's so many things I want to write. I need more time to write in. I need more space, and I have to somehow make it happen. And that's it. That's really it. I don't have anything. Look, if I thought I was going to die tomorrow, I wouldn't do anything today differently than I'd already done. That's a true hedonist's answer. I know that I've lived the life that I wanted to live today, and I just want to get in a bit of writing before I go, if I can.
You are like the truest form of writer I think I have ever met. And I love it so much at everything. As you said, like writing is your world, and then everything else, everyone else orbits around that. And I absolutely love that, because a lot of writers cannot even obtain such discipline like that. And it's just because, as you said, you're obsessed, and this is your passion, this is who you are, this is your entity. So it's very inspiring to hear such raw passion.
Shouldn't blame themselves if they don't feel that way, because I was lucky in, so many things made that so for me, or honed that for me. Being a lonely kid, having those things happen, looking for space and finding it in writing, all those things are just chance. And all they did was let me get to writing before adult life got in the way. And for most people, a girl like you would write at 15, but many, many girls who start, and boys who start at 15 and 16, life gets in the way. Unfortunately, they go to school, they go to university, and university sucks your soul out through your eyeballs. And so does high school. It means you don't have time in which to dream, time in which to create. If I were to rewrite the school curriculum, I would have half of every day given to creativity of some form or another. And that's all, and no marking of anything actually, but especially no marking of artistic stuff, because I think then you would give yourself permission to be creatives instead of feeling like, because I love it, it must not be something I should be allowed to do. It's that punitive way of thinking where if it hurts, it's good for me. Why? Why should the fact that we love writing be not the centre of our lives? But then you have commitments and you have love and you have that do no harm kind of thing where you're responsible for people. Like when my daughter was growing up, I was the breadwinner, and my partner, because my partner came from Prague, he was a musician. It's very hard when you're older to get a career started up, and I wanted him here. I was earning enough money, but I was supporting it all. And part of me was anxious. I took a lot of speaking work. I did a lot of stuff speaking wise to be able to, so that I could have the time to write, but I could support people. And I was exhausted and I was overwhelmed. And, later on there were reasons where I threw aside a lot of stuff because I'd lived these years of intense productivity but also very little freedom in a sense. Everything was focused, everything was because it needed to be. And we have to do the things that the world and our lives that we've committed to, the people we love and around us that we have responsibility to, we have to, we have to live in that world too. What kind of people would we be if we just simply dropped our everything and became a writer? That's a choice too, but it wouldn't be my choice. If I was caught up in that kind of world, I would fulfill my obligations. But, you should allow yourself to elbow space for writing. It is worthy of the thing it's worthy of the world. You're worthy, and it's necessary for the world, for creatives to create. So, to if you can, give yourself the space, give yourself the right to elbow out some space for your writing. And even if you can't do it every second and every minute, keep thinking of it, work on it, in some every day. I'll give you a little tip. One writer told me, which I always wanted to try and I haven't tried yet. And that's that you put on the wall beside your stove a piece of paper and you write an idea for a story on it. And then you put a pencil beside it or a pen that you can write. And every day while you're sitting there doing your cooking or making your coffee, you read the note, and any thought that occurs to you, you write it on the paper. When the paper's filled up, you put it aside, you put the paper up again with the idea, maybe slightly rejigged, and do it again. And then you start typing those things up. And before long, you have a book. She wrote a book called, I think, Falling. She's a Dutch writer, an incredible book called Falling. And that's how she writes. And there's another writer who writes, writes 1 page a day. Was it Kate Grenville who writes 1 page a day? No, Thea Astley used to write 1 page a day. Anyone can do that. I mean, I can't imagine how she can do it unless the idea is in her head constantly. I mean, I wouldn't have the discipline to stop. And that's my problem, stopping and coming to ends. That's my problem. But yes, so to feel that, it's lovely to have that passion and all the rest of it, but you've got to allow yourself the space, whatever space there is, find a way to make it yours and to use it.
You and I are going to go on a little speed dating. I have a segment now. It's speed dating with an author. So I have a candle. I'm a romantic. You're very welcome. And we're going to go with 5 rapid questions. So my first one is, what is the clumsiest moment you've ever had?
Clumsiest moment I ever had is falling over on the Opera House stage, going to get an award because I was the first one up and they had painted the lights black from the back. So I didn't see it. So on the entire 2,000 people saw me fall over. Actually about 1,000, because if you blinked, you'd have missed it because I was up that fast. So clumsiest moment ever.
You actually did what a lot of people's biggest fear is, like, please don't pull up the stairs, please don't pull up. Oh.
It was horrible.
I mean, I'm glad you can laugh about it now. That's great. How would you describe yourself in 3 words?
Driven, passionate, hedonist.
What is the song that best describes you?
A song?
Yeah.
I Will Survive. That's the first one that comes into my head. I don't know why.
It's a good one though. What is your life motto?
My life motto? To write.
And what is one unique talent or skill set that many people don't know you have?
I'm a very good gunshot.
Really?
I would never shoot a gun. I was under circumstances where I had to. And no, I wasn't shooting someone to kill them. I was in a circumstance where I had to. And it was discovered that I was a very good shot.
Wow, that's a bit
a skill. No, that's probably not a skill.
I'll take it as a skill. It's a bit scary. I'm like, okay, don't.
But come the zombie apocalypse, probably wouldn't be any good.
You're right. You're
fine. Out of a plane. I jumped out of a plane. That's not a skill set either.
What was it like?
Fantastic. Very exciting. I only did it twice. I did it as a journalist for a story. The only thing that was that exciting was having a baby.
Wow. Both of those sound terrifying to me. So
terrifying, but no one ever told me that having a baby is thrilling as well as terrifying. So, and it was, mind you, 1 hour labour. So I know. Yeah, I know. Who knew? I was 40.
Really? Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, I know. I said to them, give me some drugs. And he said, you can't have any, you're too fast. I said, what? I was told I could have happy gas. He said, no, you can't have anything. So I had to do it. Oh my God.
What is coming up for you this year? What are you working on? What are we on the lookout for?
Well, I'll have the Velvet City will come out in July. This story, I think it probably will come out by the end of the year, the one I'm writing now, which is called, it's called The Cat's Tale, Tale. And it's sort of a story about, well, you know, again, it's about what are we as what happens to us as human beings as part of a planet if the planet itself has some say. So there's that, and there'll be illustrations to that. And I've just had a poem accepted at first. Well, no, I had one poem before accepted. I secretly write poetry, which is not for publication. But someone asked me for one about, you know, the whole time of COVID. So mine is called The Chickens of the Apocalypse. So I'm having a poetry book come out. So that'll be exciting.
When is that due to come out? Or we're not sure yet on release day?
I don't know. She hasn't told me that yet, but she just accepted it yesterday. So I'm very excited about that.
Congratulations.
I'll be at Byron Bay. I believe I'll be at Byron Bay Writers Festival because we're just in negotiation. I'll do a little regional tour, always around COVID there. I'm going to be recording the Velvet City at some time later on in the year. So that'll come out around the same time as an audio recording. Belinda will have that come out as well. So you can listen to that free. It's through libraries if you've got the app. And I don't think I'll be travelling overseas this year. I will go to the snow and write for a while. I'm going to run some mini mentorships and invite some people to come to the mountains with me. And that's pretty much it. So much swimming, a lot of swimming, a lot of going to the sea if I can.
And if your physiotherapist has anything to do with it, a lot of walking.
Yeah, I actually invited her to dinner and I said, I need some terminology. I need some physiotherapy kind of terminology. I need you to tell me what's that or what's that. So I've invited her to dinner under the understanding that I get to pick her brain.
I have had such a blast today, Isobelle. Thank you so much for hopping on.
You have really enjoyed it too. You know, good questions always get out of you more than you realised you thought. Like I've talked today about some things that I haven't thought about for years at all. And I've told you things that I thought I would never tell in a public arena. So, you know, that's interesting too. I must be at a point where I'm ready to let it all out.
I love it. I love the raw material. You're just like, bugger it. Here it is. Off with the shoes. We're done.
Is it called Unplugged? Is that it? Isobelle Unplugged.
Oh my goodness. I could do that as the caption.
Oh God.
Well, I'm going to love you and leave you. And thank you so much for hopping on.
My pleasure.
Bye.